Now Alessio Bragadini. We talk about out of sight, out of mind, survival tricks and tools for remote developers. Thank you.
Hello. So, well, it's been fun. Actually, it's pretty much on topic because when, like me, when we work from a remote location, when we work from home, when we work from a cafeteria, when we work, like happened to me once, in a corner next to a wall at the Tokyo airport at 2 a.m. at night because there was a problem on a server. These kind of technical problems are very common. And this talk, we will rush, because we have very little time, through some of the key aspects of being a remote developer in a distributed team, or in my case, to be a remote developer with a team that is mostly based in a specific office. Another version of this talk was how not to be forgotten when you're away from your colleagues that work on code. And we will also talk a bit about Python and Django, which are the tools that I use with my team. So very quickly, it's not only to introduce myself because it's a good practice, but because it's relevant to the topics that I'm going to talk about. I'm a web backend developer. I've been for a number of years, and I worked in more than one job with a remote team or with a distributed team. At the moment, I'm working for Agile 42, which is an agile training and coaching company, meaning that we try to help other teams, and we also use agile methodologies in our own work. The team is very distributed. We work in Europe, North America, and South Africa, and in Italy. The Web IT team, most of it is in Berlin, our headquarters, but also key elements, including myself, are scattered around the world, and we have a policy to let people work from home when it's needed or from different locations. As we mentioned, we use Python and Django. We use agile methodologies. I work from Milan, and basically most of these things are my own thinking about how to preserve my sanity and to allow myself to be productive in such an environment. So remote working is a big thing. It's something that everyone wants to do, and especially if you notice on job boards and in community forums, everyone expects that the company they're interviewing for allows some degree of remote working. This is especially true in Italy because we have so many beautiful small and medium-sized cities, and not everyone wants to go to work in Rome or Milan. They don't want to go to Berlin, they don't want to go to London or even to San Francisco. How can our community improve with talents scattered all over the place? The dream is to be allowed to work at a different pace, maybe in front of the sea, maybe in a beautiful courtyard, here in Tuscany, in a beautiful villa near Siena, and to have our own hours and not to be subjected to the commute of big cities. Of course, most of the people actually end up working in a co-working, very messy, or at home. I really advise against working from home because, you know, there are a number of problems and things never go as smoothly as you expect. And generally, there is a big disconnection between the two sides of the screen. Okay, after this introduction, I would like to introduce the main topic, basically, of the talk, and thanks to Zach Holman that wrote a very interesting post some time ago, and he highlighted the difference between a remote-friendly versus a remote-first team or company. The company we talked about before, the one we want to be working for, is a remote-friendly company. A company that allows you to work from home a few days a week, or even your full time, that allows to have your own workflow and your own hours. This is very important. This is a big step for our community of developers. But it's not a remote-first company. A remote-friendly company is some team that has a central location and you connect to the tools and the project that are run by that office. Sometimes there is a kind of a physical extension of the office in form of a VPN or some other tool that you use to connect to the office. So you are a satellite. Remote first is a completely different concept, even if it uses some tools that are the same, because you start from the assumption that every developer, every member of the team is in a different location, possibly in a different time zone, with a different workflow, and you have to plan accordingly. And this is a big step. As I mentioned, we work with Agile. We are an Agile company that tries to teach Agile to other teams, and we try to live by Agile methodologies and values. These things can be helpful. Yes, they can, especially because if you think that Agile development has a big tool in test-driven development that allows certain parts of the development team to work and then integrate with a safety net and a standard set of procedures. I'll make it very quick and easy, but you know what I'm talking about. At the same time, it assumes no code ownership. It's not that a certain function is the domain of one developer or even a small team. This is very helpful when different people need to access a certain part of the code at different times. And of course, it's all about communication and even visual backlogs in forms of boards, tools, status things, the Kanban boards versus the rundown charts and so on. They can be physical or electronical and allows all the stakeholders, meaning the management, but also members of the team that don't work in sync with the rest of the others to come aboard at their own time. Now, we take a detour. We say that Agile may help, but at the same time, there is a growing concern in the Agile community that remote working goes against some of the Agile principles. It is true that in our own work as coaches, we've always found that the best teams are the ones that are co-located in the same room, that they manage to communicate efficiently all the time. So, if we go back to the Agile Manifesto and one of its principles, we actually find that it says the most efficient and effective method of conveying information to and within a development team is face-to-face conversation, which is quite a bit of a problem if we are talking about remote working. Well, there are historical reasons, and we have to decode what it says. The historical reason is that it comes from a time where the team were meeting only in big rooms once in a while, working with thick documentation. So the critique is mostly to big corporate environment. And we have to decode what a face-to-face conversation actually is. I think that face-to-face means physical proximity, that's the most obvious meaning, but also a sense of truthfulness. Meaning that when you say, I had a face-to-face conversation with Jim, it means that you talk very clearly, one-on-one, and you discuss what needed to be discussed. The fact that you were in the same room is a part of it. Until a few years ago, it was basically the only way to have a meaningful one-to-one conversation with 100% commitment by the two parts. But now, we live in a different world. We live in a world where we constantly chat with people, with significant others, lovers, friends, we have group chats, we have WhatsApp chats, we have all the kind of stuff that basically are as reliable as the face-to-face conversations. So 99% of what we meant of face-to-face, meaning truthfulness and full engagement from the two parties, can be achieved even in an electronic way. Not to mention that body language is always a thing between humans and the pleasure of being in the same room with someone else. But we get very close. And so the fact that when we say we need face-to-face conversation, it's more like we need honest conversation. And we have to discuss what is information for a team. When the Agile Manifesto says the best way to convey information, what is this information they're talking about? For sure, it's the big picture of the project. The big picture of the project is typically the things that you do on meetings and sometimes in reviews and in ceremonies. So these things can happen easily over Skype or some other multimedia environment, especially if video is involved because of the pleasure of working together with other people. Other things are discussions about code or design that nowadays happen more efficiently over an electronic tool, peer review, bug fixing, pair programming, because you have your code or your artifacts in front of you and you can actually discuss them. Then there are a lot of information like I've done this, I want to do that, and basically they are commits, tasks, things that are the nitty-gritty of the project, and we all put them in some kind of electronic tool. This electronic tool talk to us. They can talk to the team. They can say to us, we had 2 commits, we had a new milestone, this task has moved forward, or I added a comment to the task. Not to mention what goes backward. All the bugs, all the regressions, all the things that comes from our continuous integration tools and things like that give us a lot of information that can be even more valuable than the actual comment of a coworker. So, if you add in that links, ideas, jokes, etc. that we share on Slack channels and maybe the comments you're sending out now about the conference and whatever, you see that basically there are different sets of information that can find their way to a discussion without the need of being actually talked and discussed in a room with the team all present. We go back to Zach for another quote, which is basically the center of the matter. If you use the chat instead of a meeting, where meeting is a meeting in a room, you know, with a big table, and instead of saying to the coworker, I've committed this piece of code, I've closed this bug, or I found this new bug, you let automated tools explain the situation to the whole team in an electronic way, usually through a channel in a chat. What you've done, basically you've moved the focus of your team from the room to a virtual room where everyone can participate and can see the log of the action, and in turn can participate actively at their own pace. So you've moved from a situation when it's remote friendly, meaning that your developer who is traveling and is currently in South America can jump in and make a commit and so on, to a situation where it's remote first, where the actual conversation is in a chat and different people can jump in at different times without having a headquarter and satellites. This is quite a big change because it can lead to extremely distributed companies and teams. Okay, sorry, just, okay. 10 minutes, yeah, okay. more or less. I think I'm rushing a bit. Some technical suggestions. The code usually goes in a repository that is easily accessible by all the team. GitHub, Bitbucket, and a number of other tools, GitLab, are very popular because they have a low barrier for everyone to help and to see the situation of the project. Security is a factor, so not every team can go on that, but it's the first step in establishing a shared code and a distributed team. Of course, you need automated unit testing and continuous integration testing, because otherwise you lose this ability of being able to contribute at different steps, keeping the project in sync and with the system telling the team exactly how it's going. Continuous integration is an extremely important part of being able to work with a distributed team. At the same time, you can have, and you should have, continuous deployment on a test server that shows exactly what's the status of the project. And the more you automate all these things in a kind of DevOps way, the more you can safely add satellite developers in different places. We, as Agile coaches, we love putting things on big boards in the wall. Unfortunately, this is a thing that we have to lose because it's kind of complicated, even if there are some ideas to do that, when your team is distributed. But at the very least, you need to have a good shared tool for task planning and for painting the big picture in terms of epics and milestones of what you're going to build. So everyone can have a sense of the direction the project is going. There are also, and probably more importantly, a number of other things you have to take into consideration if you want to have a distributed team that are not technical. In an Agile environment, we need Agile ceremonies, especially the daily stand-up and the retrospective, and the sprint planning and sprint review if you do sprint, if you do Scrum or other methodologies. And these don't go away just because your team is not in the same place. On the contrary, they are extremely important because it's a coded way for your team to sync and discuss. So for example, with my team, we have the daily stand-up over Skype, and sometimes I open Skype and we have two connections, one from Berlin, one from Milan. Sometimes there are 3 or 4 that say, what's happening? Oh, I'm traveling, but I'm here for the daily stand-up, because it's important to keep the team in sync. You need to explain things more. Since you don't rely on the chit-chat you do over coffee at your office, when you're planning to work on something, you need to tell to your coworkers. You explain what you're going to do, which is basically an expansion of the daily stand-up. What you're going to do in the next few days, the kind of steps you're taking. This increases conversation, and this is very important to keep everyone on board. When I say conversation, it's probably on a chat or even over email in the communication medium that you prefer. Sometimes it's useful to establish work hours. If the majority of your developers is in Europe and they work 9 a.m., 5 p.m., it may be useful, even if you're not a morning person, which is exactly like me, to be in your virtual office at 9 a.m. so you can communicate more with your team. Because if you keep all other hours, you have to understand that you're probably going to work on areas that are different, and you pick up what your team has done and contribute to that, and there is a bit of overlapping, which may be a good thing if you want to move your project fast using the different time zone, and depending on the project, it may be a problem. So this is a discussion you need to have with your team and your company. Like having the chat channel open all the time. it's like you're available for work instead of give me this task, I will do it, and I will report tomorrow the daily stand-up. Meeting face-to-face is always important, and it needs to happen from time to time. Most companies do big yearly retreats. Teams meet more regularly. It's not that you can be completely virtual. The human aspect of it is still very important. That's why we use Skype a lot, because basically it's just it's very close to being there, but sometimes you really need to be there and to talk with other people. There are a lot of discussions about these topics, especially from the companies that actively do it and promote it. There I put two names. I put Automatic, the maker of WordPress, or at least the steward of WordPress, and Balsamic, an Italian company. They are very, very open, and they talk a lot about their approach on having a fully distributed team. I put a couple of notes in the links at the end of the presentation, but there are a number of other companies and teams that do all these things, or at least a subset of these, and they're very open. So it's a good time to jump in the discussion online and to contribute, because it's very important for the community. So this, for example, is nearly impossible to read, I believe. This is just a screenshot from our own Slack channel that is at the center of our development. There are personal messages, there are commit states from Bitbucket in this case, Jenkins, which is our own continuous integration server. It's very important for us to have it green, and when it's not green, discussion starts, what happened, what can we do, and so on. And this way, I can collaborate easily with my colleagues who are in Berlin. These are team setup. Most of the things I already mentioned. We do test drive and development. We do the unit test. We do Selenium for integration. We do a lot of visual tests to see that the products are coming the way and we don't have regressions. We use Jenkins for continuous integration, and we're taking a full DevOps approach of having infrastructure as code. These allow us to create test servers and drop them, and all these kind of things are very important on keeping the project running. We have a few projects. Some of them are GitHub and some of them are Bitbucket. Basically, it's the same thing. And I mentioned, and you saw the Slack channel. All these other tools are being configured to feed into Slack. This is why we believe Slack is more than just a chat channel, to give us this kind of automated feedback that allow us to keep the conversation running even when I'm too lazy to say I committed this, I have a problem with that. There is some automated tool that help me in that. And we use Skype for all the agile ceremonies, including the daily stand-up and so on. We also use Trello, use our own tool which is called Agile for Scrum, use Google Docs. I believe that this slide doesn't surprise you at all, and if it does, you're welcome to go and check for these tools, which are all very helpful to a team for doing development. So, sorry if I rushed. Yes, of course. You can talk with us about these topics. I'm very welcome to chit-chat with you. I've left on the slide our own website, the Twitter handle of Agile42, the Twitter handle of myself. We are a remote team. We're always looking for talents. We're always looking for ideas how to improve, especially for Django and Python. I'm sorry that that part got cut most from the presentation, how we use these tools. And I will be around here to talk with you. If you download the slides from SlideShare, they should be already there. There are also some extra links that you may find interesting to start this discussion. Thank you.
So there is time for a few questions if you want. Okay?
I'd like to know, in your opinion, how to pitch for a job that is not officially on the job board remote working, published as a remote working job. So how to pitch that company, or eventually how to pitch as a freelance remote working to convey the value to do that and eventually change their mind.
Okay. Without going too much into how to do a job interview, there are different ways to do a job interview. One is to ask questions, and so to look very interested in how the company operates and their framework. So a good question would be, why this job cannot be remote? And maybe there are some good reasons. Maybe they've tried and they failed. Maybe they have security requirements that cannot be met with a remote worker. Maybe they never thought about it. So it's a good way to start a conversation. And because the advantages, I think, are already on the table, and all IT managers should know it. You have people spending less time in commute, you have people less stressed, and the fact that, oh yeah, but if you're at home, I don't see if you're working, is mostly silly for, I suppose, you're some kind of developer. And for everyone working in IT, we are all judged on results, performance, and not on the time we stay in front of a screen watching Stack Overflow because we cannot fix the thing. I understand it may be a deal for other kind of jobs, but for IT, I think this area, I believe there may be other reasons. And as I mentioned, there is a point of view, a valid point of view, that a distributed team is not as effective as a co-located one. And maybe you can have a conversation with the IT manager, and maybe you will be convinced or not, but at least you know what you're talking about.
Okay, it's the time for the lunch. Thank you.
Thank you.